81% of grade 4 pupils unable to read for meaning. South Africa has the worst reading literacy proficiency in the entire globe. A shocking statistic. This is reported by the 2021 Progress in International Reading Literacy Study, which evaluated 12,426 pupils nationwide and contrasted their results with pupils of the same age in 42 other countries. We speak now to education expert Professor Metcalfe and schools, libraries and special sales representative from Jonathan Ball Publishers, Gontse Mosiane. A very good morning to our guests and thank you so much for your time. Prof. Metcalfe, let's start with you perhaps. This is nothing new. We've heard this from this particular study before. Taking a look at what is contained in the study, what stood out the most for you?
Well, Dudu, I think the first thing that's very important is we do have a problem and we have ideas about how to fix it, and that's good news. But when you say the study as a whole, there's several things that I think we need to acknowledge. Firstly, when we say the world, most of the countries in the study are countries in the global north. They're countries that don't share the same socioeconomic disadvantages of us. That said, we have a lot of work to do. The second thing that I think is important about this study is that, in fact, even in the better developed countries, the countries that don't have the same inequality, in 10 of the 21 countries that fell between 2016 and 2021, the score fell, and it is in relation to COVID. So the achievement scores fell in many countries, and the decline in those countries was also the loss of a year. So I'm not giving those two pieces of information to any way minimize the reality that we have huge challenges in reading. But we do need also to get into context the fact that this is global and we're comparing ourselves rather bravely to countries which don't have the same massive inequalities. For example, Brazil is a country which also has these huge inequalities, and its results are similar to ours. The only other thing that I think I'd like to highlight about the results is that it's South Africa and Brazil in amongst this list of countries that have the widest range of performance. Where most countries have a narrower range of performance, we and Brazil have a wide range of performance, which I think speaks to inequalities. And the last point for me about the results is that it's a wake-up call even for our good schools, because even the best performing schools are still way below the average of these wealthier, less unequal countries that we comparing ourselves to.
Important context, Prof. Gontse, with the work that you do, what is it that you find in terms of access to reading material for young people, and not just to have access, but to have people to sit down with them and take them through that?
We find that there aren't a lot of opportunities given to pupils to have time to sit down and read. We've also found that the budgets that are given are not enough on that side. So I think that we need to just focus on the aspect of allowing time and allowing funds for these kinds of things.
Prof. Metcalfe, I see you agreeing. I would like to go and unpack some of the points that you raised, right, especially when we speak of socio-economic disadvantages and inequality. We'll get to COVID-19 in a few moments, but in the almost 30 years that democratic South Africa has been in existence, what then does this suggest if we're still citing inequality and socioeconomic disadvantages in our children not making the mark, if you will?
It's a very good question, because I think we need to understand, I would say, at least two things. Number one is that the inequalities in society are replicated in education, and education alone cannot change those inequalities. It's an important component of it, but the reality of the worsening economic situation and families struggling and the enduring persistent poverty does affect education. The second thing that's very important to know is that in the results of this international survey, it was the children from the most socioeconomic disadvantaged circumstances that declined the most, which is why Pumzi's point is so crucial. Children learn to read by reading, and we have to get more reading material, particularly in the mother tongue, into schools and into homes, because children don't learn to read again just in 1 or 2 lessons a day, in half of the school day, whatever, however the teachers manage the integration of reading. They need to see reading as part of everyday life. They need to see their families using reading, and they need to understand it as a source of pleasure and of information.
And Gontse, that's the point, right? Because what is it that you're finding? Are young people, one, interested in reading? Number two, you've got so much competition with the digital space, right? So you've got 10-year-olds who have access to cell phones, or even 8-year-olds who have access to cell phones. They'd rather be on TikTok than pick up a book.
100%. That is the challenge that we found ourselves in coming out of the pandemic. What we've been able to do is access a lot of platforms to kind of extend our reach. For example, we have this phenomenon known as book talk. So if you look it up on TikTok and you look up the hashtag book talk, you're able to find titles that are trending, and that's a phenomenon that's really taken over the world by storm. That's just an example of a platform that we've now engaged with. We have titles that we import from the UK. One of the more popular authors that a lot of our viewers might know is Colleen Hoover, and she is absolutely incredible with her writing and her style of writing, and that is kind of what we're trying to punt, is trying to adapt to this new world where everyone has technology, social media. Let us try and promote books on these platforms. In store, it's a different story. A lot of kids come in, browse, are interested, maybe don't have the funds necessarily, maybe aren't given the opportunity to be interested in these books. We find our booksellers on the floor having to convince, having to upsell, to encourage reading. And that just shows, I think, that the interest kind of was not sparked at home.
Sure. So you do find that people walk through your doors and would prefer that copy, to go through it, to, flick through it and smell it and read it.
100%. The texture of a book, the studies that show that learners, anyone is able to retain more information from holding a book versus your tablet, from just reading your notifications or anything like that, kind of escapes your brain a lot quicker than if you had the texture of a book and the smell and the dust that comes with it.
Prof, I guess I was asking about whether we're still talking about inequality and socioeconomic disadvantages still being responsible for our children not making the grade, because you speak to the education department and they will tell you that they're doing all that they can, and they are asking for parents to then collaborate with them as well. And so looking into the future, how then do we prepare our little ones? And a math teacher this week was also pointing out to, even with math literacy, they are struggling, especially for the little ones, to get them to keep up and to be able to play on an international world stage. So what is it that we need to do?
So, Dudu, I'd like to do 2 things. I'd like to build on what Pumzi has said, and then I want to deal with this question of, is the DBE doing everything they can? So, the developments that Pumzi's spoken about are exciting to me. But actually, this kind of wonderful technology which can promote reading, which can support the reading of books, is in our context a wonderful thing, but it actually exacerbates inequality and it doesn't reduce it. Because the majority of children, they don't necessarily have the device, they don't necessarily have the data or access to Wi-Fi. So we have to address those systemic structural risk constraints on children being able to use this wonderful thing of IT. The second thing is the DBE doing enough? I would argue not yet. I strongly believe that we have lots of evidence from excellent full-scale studies that show us that we need to train teachers better, we need to provide them with more material, we need to provide learners with more reading material. And I'm glad that the DBE is working on a plan, and that plan needs to be very carefully, programmatically developed, so that within that programmatic development of the plan, we've got very clear time frames, very clear monitoring, very clear funding of our ambitions. So the DBE is trying, but we need the DBE to do better.
Okay. Gontse, are we finding that there's interest in mother tongue language books or reading material?
Yes, definitely. I think that when a lot of these pupils grow up, they're spoken to in mother tongue. They're raised in the language that their family has grown up with. They then go to school, and you might find some of the teachers who struggle with English are able to communicate better in their mother tongue, teach the subject in their mother tongue. When it comes to writing the exam, when it comes to engaging in English, that's where the difficulty comes in.
Prof, in closing up the conversation, let's find solutions. Like you said, this is a study where we are comparing ourselves with the global north, for lack of a better phrase. And so in our context, is it time to genuinely take a look at introducing more so mother tongue teaching at schools, right? So whereas, maybe you'll take up isiZulu in much later on at school in grade 10, or you decide in grade 8 whether you want to take isiZulu or Sesotho. And number two, motivating young people. Is it about us also, what they hear at home and how we speak to them, our attitude towards them, especially if they get frustrated, because they also get frustrated like adults when they're not able to get it right?
Well, let me start with the second question, because I think I'll do that quite quickly. Is that all families, whatever the socioeconomic circumstances, need to understand the importance of using text, using reading as part of everyday life, looking at the reading that's around them, the street signs, what the instructions on the food packet say. It needs to become part of our consciousness of helping young children learn that these squiggles on the page have meaning and they can be helpful. We need to tell them stories. There's so much that can be done at home, and it's crucial. But the first question that you asked was about mother tongue instruction. So let me say this is the experience of the majority of learners in this country. Most learners serving African children start off with the first 3 years with mother tongue instruction. Sometimes that's complicated in a province like Gauteng, where you have so many languages all in one place. Even then, there would be language-specific schools. Now, it's so important to start to read in a language you can understand. You need to be able to just make sense of what a book is for, what the letters, the grapheme, what those letters mean in terms of sounds, the different variations. You need to be able to understand that this is a pleasurable activity. So the first 3 years should be dedicated to confidence in reading in the mother tongue. Now, this Pearl study was done in the mother tongue in grade 4. Now, why is that significant for South Africa? Is for the majority of learners, schools somehow don't use the right that they have in the legislation, embedded in the Constitution, to carry on learning in the mother tongue. And the majority of those schools transition to English. Now, English for many children is more or less a foreign language. It's not spoken in community. They don't come across it every day. They haven't learned to read in the mother tongue. And now the medium of instruction is English. They must read textbooks in the new subjects that they face in grade 4. So we need to do more to flood our schools with mother tongue material all the way, not only in grades 1, 2, and 3, but grade 4, 5, and 6, because you need to keep on practicing your reading confidence. And I would like to see more schools exploring the possibility of using languages other than English after grade 4, if that's in the best interests of the learners, because learning in a language you don't understand is very difficult.
Absolutely. Prof, before we let you go, speaking of flood, I remember one of the math teachers recently this week saying that, well, children are also flooded with so much. There's sport activity. So each and every single day, you've got a sporting activity or you've got an extracurricular that you need to do on top of your homework, on top of everything else. Are we flooding our children with too much, or is there no such thing? Is that just preparing you for life? Because, baby girl, deal with it. That's how it's going to be for the rest of your life.
I think there are particular pressures on teachers at the moment, and there probably is an increase, at least in homework, and that is because, as South Africans, as all other countries, I've been looking at some of the international stuff on this, is that we lost so much time in 1920, 21, and to a lesser extent 22, that children in all grades have got lots of learning time that was lost and need to be caught up. So things are probably very pressured on learners at the moment, just in terms of the curriculum, let alone the extramurals. But families and parents need to know that this is an investment that's crucial, because there's time to be caught up.
Thank you very much to both our guests, education expert, Professor Mary Metcalfe, as well as Gontse Mosiane, Schools, Libraries and Special Sales Rep at Jonathan Ball Publishers. Thank you.